We often hear about the intended targets of economic sanctions, the countries meant to be brought to heel through financial pressure. But what if the narrative we've been told is incomplete? What if the very tools designed to weaken adversaries are, in fact, subtly undermining the strength of the nations wielding them? Stop assuming sanctions are a one-way street. What if the real economic pain, the long-term consequences, are quietly hitting us at home, eroding our financial foundations and straining our relationships with key allies? It's a question that demands a closer look, a deeper dive beyond the surface-level headlines. Let's dig into how Iran's sanctions specifically have boomeranged back, creating a ripple effect that extends far beyond the borders of the sanctioned nation. We need to examine the unintended consequences, the hidden costs that are often overlooked in the pursuit of geopolitical objectives. This isn't just about the US. It's about the intricate web of global economics and how sanctions impact the US and its closest friends, those nations that have historically stood shoulder to shoulder in the face of international challenges. How have these sanctions affected their economies, their businesses, and their trust in the stability of the international system? Since the 1980s, the US has leaned hard on sanctions as a primary tool of foreign policy, a way to exert influence and pressure without resorting to military intervention. It's a strategy that has been employed across administrations, against various countries, and for a multitude of reasons, and Iran has often found itself in the crosshairs, the target of these economic measures designed to squeeze Iran, to limit its access to global markets, restrict its financial transactions, and ultimately, alter its behavior on the international stage. The initial impetus for these sanctions dates back to the Iran hostage crisis, a pivotal moment in US-Iran relations that dramatically shifted the dynamics between the two nations. The seizure of the American embassy in Tehran and the subsequent holding of American diplomats hostage for 444 days triggered a wave of economic measures aimed at isolating Iran. First after the hostage crisis, and in more recent decades, concerns over Iran's nuclear program have fueled further rounds of sanctions, as the US and its allies have sought to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. These concerns, whether justified or not, have led to increasingly stringent economic restrictions impacting various sectors of the Iranian economy. Then, over nuclear fears. But here's what doesn't make headlines, what often gets lost in the broader narrative of geopolitical strategy and international relations, the subtle, often unseen consequences of these actions. Those same sanctions, while intended to weaken Iran, have quietly chipped away at America's own financial standing, creating a slow and steady drain on resources and opportunities. It's a complex interplay of cause and effect, where actions taken on the international stage have unintended repercussions on America's own finances, impacting everything from trade balances to national debt. Back in 1980, the US enjoyed a fat trade surplus, a healthy balance of exports exceeding imports, indicating a strong and competitive economy. This surplus provided a buffer against economic shocks, and allowed the US to invest in its own growth and development. That surplus amounted to about $366 billion in today's dollars, a significant sum that reflected America's economic dominance at the time. It was a period of relative prosperity and financial stability. But by 1986, right as the Iran sanction regime took hold and began to intensify, a noticeable shift occurred in the US economic landscape. The trade surplus began to dwindle, and the nation's financial position started to weaken. The US flipped to a net debtor, meaning it owed more to foreign creditors than it was owed, a significant turning point in the nation's economic history. This transition marked the beginning of a long-term trend of increasing debt and financial vulnerability. Fast forward to now, to the present day, and the national debt has exploded to levels that were once unimaginable, a staggering accumulation of borrowing that casts a long shadow over the nation's future. The national debt now stands at a mind-boggling $37 trillion, a figure that represents the cumulative effect of decades of deficits and borrowing. It's a burden that will be borne by future generations. Now, it's crucial to acknowledge that sanctions didn't cause it all, that there are numerous factors that have contributed to the nation's debt and economic challenges. But by stifling trade, disrupting established economic relationships and rattling markets with uncertainty, sanctions have undoubtedly played a role in exacerbating these problems. They fanned the flames of economic instability, contributing to a climate of uncertainty and hindering long-term growth. The sanctions regime has widened deficits, forcing the government to borrow more to cover its expenses, and fueling decades of borrowing that have led to the current debt crisis. Those lost exports, the goods and services that American companies could have sold to Iran, represent a significant missed opportunity. Between 1995 and 2012 alone, a period spanning several administrations and numerous sanction regimes, the economic impact was substantial. U.S. businesses missed out on a lucrative market, losing potential revenue and hindering their ability to compete on the global stage. These businesses missed out on an estimated $175 billion in sales to Iran, a significant amount of economic activity that could have boosted the U.S. economy and created jobs. That translates to up to 66,000 jobs lost each year, a considerable impact on the American workforce and a drag on economic growth. The job losses peaked at nearly 280,000 in 2008, during the height of the global financial crisis, further exacerbating the economic hardship faced by American workers. And the economic pain was even sharper, even more pronounced for our European allies who have historically been major trading partners with Iran. Countries like Germany, Italy, and France, which have strong economic ties to Iran, have suffered significant losses as a result of the sanctions. These nations lost tens of billions of dollars too, impacting their economies and straining their relationships with the United States. But here's the kicker, the most surprising and perhaps the most damaging consequence of the sanctions regime. Sanctions have inadvertently made U.S. companies look unreliable, untrustworthy, and unstable on the world stage. The constant threat of sanctions and the unpredictable nature of U.S. foreign policy have created a perception that American businesses are subject to the whims of political agendas, making them less attractive partners for international ventures. As a result, global firms now increasingly dodge American tech, seeking alternative suppliers and partners to avoid being caught in the crosshairs of U.S. sanctions. And some countries, wary of the potential for future sanctions, are actively ditching the dollar in international transactions, seeking alternative currencies to reduce their dependence on the U.S. financial system. This trend towards de-dollarization is driven by a desire to sidestep future headaches, to insulate themselves from the potential economic fallout of U.S. sanctions. So after 4 decades of maximum pressure, of relentless economic sanctions aimed at altering Iran's behavior, what have we achieved? Iran, despite facing significant economic challenges, has adapted, found ways to circumvent the sanctions, and demonstrated remarkable resilience in the face of adversity. And what about the costs back home? The unintended consequences for the U.S. economy and its standing in the world? The costs, as we've seen, are significantly higher than most realize, a hidden burden that has been quietly accumulating over the years. Maybe it's time policymakers, those responsible for shaping U.S. foreign policy, ask a critical question. Are these sanctions, this long-standing policy of economic pressure, ultimately hurting us more than them, undermining our own economic strength and global influence in the process? It's a question that deserves serious consideration and a thorough evaluation of the long-term costs and benefits.